Is the future of the universe predetermined, or is it chaotic? How may entropy be reversed? Can this chaos not be reversed into the universe once more? This is God's last question, and the enigma that experiment on Amphorius is supposed to resolve. In the Pandora's Amphora, the destruction that kills the destruction is in its infancy, struggling to be born. At the same time, we have finally been given hints as to what the equilibrium is, what the finality is, and what, exactly, is the chessboard of the eons. As the Fool journeys across the tarot deck, the Trailblazer is blessed by the equilibrium on their path, increasing our equilibrium level as we proceed from one major arcana to another. With the symbol of a scale, it is clear that the equilibrium is supposed to represent the tarot card Justice. In the Weight deck, the Justice is equity, rightness, probity, executive, triumph of the deserving side in law. She is the Greek and Roman god of justice, Themis, the law behind the simulated order Talanton, the balance between life and death that has split into two in Phase 3 of the Amphorius experiment. In Amphorius, the equilibrium can be seen in both Talanton and Thanatos paths. In 3.5, it was revealed that she is a simulated order. However, Talanton is also heavily associated with the laws of Amphorius as its ascended black pawn, just as the order is the opposition of chaos in the scale of the equilibrium. This parallelism can be seen very clearly in both 3.1 and 3.4. In 3.1, Oronix required us to pay a price that can outweigh the fate of the world, and the answer turned out to be March's camera as a representation of her memories. This is actually a reference to the ancient Egyptian belief of the afterlife, in which dead people must weigh their heart against their sin on a scale. With Anubis as the judge, if their heart, representing their sins, weighs more than the feather of the goddess of justice, Mat, then the heart of the dead would be eaten by the devourer of souls. Of course, in Amphorius in 3.1, this was flipped backward, and we had to provide enough memories to outweigh the stone of Sisyphus on the other side, the sin that Feynman was originally supposed to pay for before we intervened, and paid it off for him with March's camera. Thus, in 3.1, the rule of equivalent exchange was preserved without Feynman sacrificing something very important to him, probably his memories or fate as the deliverer. And that is presumably why Saridra has a blue feather on her head. I'm pretty sure she's supposed to be based on Mat, the Egyptian goddess of justice, who provided the feather that the sinner's heart is supposed to be weighed against. A different version of this weighing of the hearts also took place in 3.4, this time between Mighty and Feynman in the Zeroth Eternal Recurrence. Albeit, this time, the weighing follows the Greek version of the myth instead of the Egyptian. In the Iliad, Zeus' golden scale was divided between the two fateful portions of death, Keres. Hence, in Amphorius, the equilibrium is also assigned to the twins of death, Polyxia and Castorice, in the Greek version of the weighing. Instead of weighing against the feather of justice, it is always the fates of two heroes pitched against each other. After Hector killed Patroclus, who was disguising himself as Achilles, Hector and Achilles engaged in a final competition, in which Zeus hung his golden scale for the two fateful portions of Keres, signifying that the competition would eventually lead to the death of both Achilles and Hector. As Zeus grasped the balance by the midst and raised it, and the fate of Hector sunk down to Hades, so, too, did his life. In another version of the myth, in Aeschylus' play Psychostasia, instead of Hector, it was Memnon, the son of Dawn, who died to Achilles' spear instead. Only, instead of Memnon and Hector, it's Feynman here versus Achilles my Diamos. In 3.4, mirroring the Greek version of the soul-weighing duel between Achilles and Hector, Mighty's fate as the king of Castrum Kremnos and Feynman's fate as the deliverer of Amphorius were weighed against each other, represented by Gorgo's signet and Feynman's card respectively. In the 33550-336 Eternal Return, before being killed by Euripon in the Castrum Kremnos arena, Gorgo threw the signet into the River of Souls, completing Euripon and Gorgo's ring cycle. Subsequently, Maidiamos was thrown into the river by Euripon, gaining the curse of immortality, but for his 10th thoracic vertebra, becoming the next generation of Siegfried to Feynman's Brunhild and Kriemhilda. It was not until Feynman dragged it up from the River of Souls and asked Chartonus to return it to Mighty that the heir of Nicodor regained the ring, restarting the tragedy of Siegfried, Brunhild, and Kriemhilde once more. In that eternal return, this eventually culminated in the death of Siegfried in the hands of Kriemhilde and the burning of heaven in the hands of Brunhild, ending the sins of the gods. However, while he is the Siegfried of the ring cycle as a parallel to his parents' tragedy, Mideamos was also the Achilles of the story, as the son of Peleus consumed by the rage of Nicodor. While we did not directly see how Mighty and Feynman met in the 33550-336 Eternal Return, Mideamos still holds the same role as Siegfried and Achilles across the many different Eternal Returns, albeit some events are scrambled in the Zeroth Eternal Return that we saw in 3.4. If Mighty did not regain the Signet of Gorgo until Feynman returned it to him from the River of Souls in 3.1, then in the original recurrence, Mighty was already in possession of the ring by the time Mighty and Feynman first met, leading to a different first meeting compared to the 3.1 version of the story. Instead of fighting each other for 10 days and 10 nights, Mighty and Feynman participated in the weighing of their fates, as two heroes pitched their fates against each other. On Mideamos' part, he used the Signet of Gorgo as a representative of his fate as the king of Castrum Kremnos against Feynman's fate as the deliverer, perfectly paralleling Achilles weighing against Hector and Memnon in the Iliad. Ever since 3.3, Mighty's locations have been mapped to golden scapegoat puzzles, and it's no different here. In 3.4, once more, Mighty's location on the scale was mapped to another golden scapegoat puzzle. In other words, what Mighty and Feynman were contesting for were the fate of the golden scapegoat. Just as Keres of Achilles and Hector were balanced against each other, Feynman and Mideamos' own death were equal to each other. However, just as Zeus cheated and titled the scale toward Hector, the MC cheated and titled the scale toward Feynman, sealing his death as the sacrificial scapegoat for the fate of the world, outweighing Mighty's own fate as the golden scapegoat, for the fate that Zeus' golden scale weighed were not the lives of heroes, but their fate of death, Keres, an inspiration for the name Saridra. In 2.7, I speculated that Saridra is likely a combo of Keres and probably Hydra, which has something to do with water or the multi-headed snake. While the Hydra part isn't clear right now, what we have known of Talanton's mechanism as the Charastasia of Amphoreus pretty much confirms to us that she is at least partly inspired by the Greek Keres, in addition to the obvious the Egyptian mat with her blue feather. As a daughter of the night Nyx, Keres is the ruthless avenging death, sister to Thanatos the peaceful death and the three fates, with Nyx mapping directly to Oronix the Evernight, Thanatos to Thanatos the Titan of Death, and the three fates to Janus the Titan of Space. In myths, Keres is associated with the weighing of the souls, with violent war deaths, with the revenge of the dead, and with the evils locked inside the amphora of Pandora. According to Hesiod, the many spirits of Keres are the evils in the amphora of Pandora, escaping the jar when Elpis Hope remained imprisoned inside the jar. In Amphoreus, the core flame of law is an extremely strict autonomous protocol, restricting even its administrator. In other words, Talanton's function as law came from the scepter itself, the origin of all tragedy in Amphoreus, and Saridra is literally Keres in a jar, as the heir of a scepter autonomous protocol. According to the 3.5 livestream, the cast must master the core flame of law before Era Nova could be completed, and evidently, Saridra must die for that to happen, because as part of the evil sealed inside, Talanton must not escape the amphora. At the same time, while the ancient Greeks generally associated Keres with violent death and viewed her in a negative manner, the Norse historically viewed the equivalence of Keres in Nordic mythology, the Valkyrie, in a positive light, reflecting the two cultures' different views toward wars. As the guide of heroes, and sometimes their lovers, the Valkyries represent not only the glorious death of warriors, but also the hero's journey in Nordic myths, a pretty stark contrast to the usual view of the ancient Greeks toward Keres. However, in the oldest literature such as the Iliad, similar to how the Norse viewed the Valkyrie, Achilles told of two different fates of death for himself. If he set forth on his hero's journey, then he would die the violent death of Keres and leave behind everlasting glory. In contrast, if he chose to return home and abandon the hero's journey, then he would die a peaceful death of Thanatos, but without leaving his name to history. It's obvious which path Achilles ended up choosing, the destruction of the self for the eternity on his gravestone, over the order that could never reach the stars. Only when the order died could the destruction be born, but at the same time, it is only when the order died that the finite life could bring about love, the balance of which is represented in Amphoreus by Keres' more peaceful sister, Thanatos, the simulation of the equilibrium. According to the mythical retelling in Titan Odes and the more factual record in Rising and Falling of River of Souls, originally, during the era Chrysia, the people of Amphoreus had some variant of immortality. Predators did not need to hunt, and foliage remained evergreen. In the distant past of the primordial ages, for countless years, the formless and abstract fate moved alone, but in that ethereal and abstract world, no tangible things could be born. Thus, Janus created a massive material that should not have existed in the void, Talanton molded it into a concrete shape, and Oronyx gave it the ability to self-evolve. And so, Georios was born. The three fates placed it as the initial counterweight on one side of the balance, and finally, Amphoreus had stable matter. Diogenes actually flat out told us that Amphoreans have immortal souls, so yeah, they're exactly like Mars. Thousands of city-states dotted Amphoreus, teeming with beings who knew no sorrow. At the time, lives on land were supported by Georios, the scion of permanence, and Phagusa's river of Oceanid encircled the world. For Styxia specifically, they worshipped Phagusa, who blessed them with perfect immortality, never knowing of death. In effect, the situation in Amphoreus at the time should be similar to that of Senedina's home planet and its blessing of permanence, and to Mars as well. For Senedina's home planet, a single scale of a dragon gave everyone perfect immortality until they left the planet, while for Mars, the power of Nana has been used to preserve the memories of dead people in a simulation, freezing their time and effectively locking their memories in a never-ending samsara forever. The power of each long scion is not necessarily 100% the same with each other, but for a general gist, we can assume that Amphoreus before the birth of Thanatos was somewhere between Senedina's home planet and Mars, under the permanence effect of Georios and their creations, Aquila and Phagusa. However, for an unknown reason, the Earth could not sustain such a burden. Its backbone shattered into ravines, spewing forth blood that formed rivers, devouring the fallen lives. A shadowy arm emerged from the river, Thanatos, heralding the era Chrysia's demise with their birth. From that moment, life became capable of exhaustion. From that moment, life became capable of aging. From that moment, life became capable of death. Now, we don't know the exact reason as to why the Earth broke its spine yet, but from Teravox's meme book, we do know for sure that Georios died and returned to egg form because of that event. In 3.5, Hizelins gave us some additional details. Phagusa went mad trying to swallow the black tides, leading to their imprisonment by the people of Styxia. From Rising and Falling of River of Souls, we could gather that the setting was a big war between the cities, with one of the battlefields being Idonia. From 3.0, we knew that the three calamities' arrival were attributed to the arrival of the destruction, which should have happened around phase 1 of the Amphoreus experiment, when chaos first attracted the gaze of Nanook, committing the original sin of bringing in the golden blood to the simulation and being dismembered by the eyeless lion in a sacrificial ritual to reset time. From the Styxia nymph quest scroll and golden scapegoat's murmuring, we do know that the sacrificial scapegoat, as the Prometheus in Avilius transcription, was dismembered into 4 pieces: 2 hands of Thanatos, 2 legs of Zagreus, the broken torso of Nicodor, and a murmuring head, which presumably became Kephali, because Kephali means head. Stitching all the many pieces together, we can have a rough timeline for the birth of Thanatos. In phase 1 of the experiment, Feynman, who went under chaos at the time, committed the first murder, drawing the gaze of Nanook and stealing the fire of the gods, Nanook's golden blood, for the humans. Because chaos was only a simulation inside the scepter itself, he could not ascend himself and iron tomb the anti-organic equation became a Lord Ravager instead. As a result of chaos action, from his cycle onward, golden blood was given to all 12 factors, and those who feared the fire became sheep, and those who did not become humans, as in, they became the 12 heirs. Aquila became the first to be infected by the Black Tide, then came Phagusa and Georios. Wars broke out between the cities. Aquila started to attack their own people, Phagusa went mad and was imprisoned by Styxia, and Georios broke their spine, unable to sustain the burden of the Black Tide infecting so many dead people. As the bearer of the original sin, Chaos was dismembered according to the Styxia nymph quest scroll ritual by the eyeless lion, creating the 3 calamities, and had his 4 body parts buried in 4 corners of the world. Then, his remaining reason was forced to wear a sheep mask and become the darkness itself, endlessly pursuing and hunting themselves, similar to the events that Feynman went through in his eternal recurrences in Phase 4. Georios was subsequently offered, but probably more like force-fed the golden blood by Kephale in a banquet, while the 3 calamities began to shoulder the duties as titans. To open the gates of the past, one must abide by the sacrificial rite. The eyeless lion questions, what is the limit of everything in this world? The wise at the banquet replies, the human soul. And so, he curled up at the altar, hugging his knees with a window high over his head. He stared at the lion's sharp fangs and offered his soul. The first to disappear were his hands that worked tirelessly, then his legs that measured the earth, until his torso that held his body together shattered. His head continued to murmur. When the era Chrysia came to an end in calamity, the strong devoured the weak. A lion's jaws crushed the throat of a lamb, a dagger struck deep into the helpless, and countless corpses flooded the river of souls, bringing its flow to a halt. Even death faltered, overwhelmed and unable to ferry the fallen. The mournful pile of bones, crushed beneath the relentless waves, was forged into an indestructible colossus. Rising from the river of souls, it climbed in a roar onto the land, vowing to unleash divine retribution upon all who were unjust. Nicodor, the conqueror of all conquerors, thus strode across the land with a vow to overthrow the gods themselves. From then on, Nicodor had become Kephale's eternal nemesis, waging a war that never ends, all to open the gates of the past. The Kremnoans sing that only the fear of the 100-eyed giant bird, cowering in the clouds, caused Nicodor to pursue the sun endlessly, day and night. Thus, they cleaved Jorio's fortress, cast down the stars of Oronix, and aimed their blade at Kephale upon the throne. Scars etched themselves again and again into the divine bodies of the 2 titans, only to heal and reappear, with no victor after 1,000 years. Beneath Kremnos, Nicodor has descended into madness, while atop the holy city, Kephale remains in eternal slumber. For Zagreus, they weaved a lie about Kephale's continued sanity, stealing Kephale's dawn device, his core flame, maintaining the illusion of Era Chrysia before they were presumably chased down by Kephale and had to fake their own deaths in Styxia. For Thanatos, under the watchful eye of the scale of justice, they swore oaths with the gods. The river of souls marked the boundary, where death would balance life in Amphoreus. Departed souls would journey to the realm of Thanatos, boarding the ferryman's long boat to transition from this life to the next. In Thanatos' own weighing of the heart, if the reaper raises their left hand, the soul is granted death and allowed to enter the nether realm to await reincarnation. If they raise their right hand, the soul is rejected by the nether realm and returned to the mortal realm to continue walking the earth. That's why the Hand of Shadow can only lay down judgment and not embrace another being. Death was originally a pair of hands, but they were split in twain when we reached the mortal realm, never to touch each other ever again. Thus, this is why Thanatos is the equilibrium. The true function of Thanatos is the weighing of the heart. Just as the Hands of Shadow lay down judgment for the dead souls to plant the new life of the next samsara, Polyxia needed to extract Castorice's heart and light the flame of death, only for Polyxia to shatter the bottom line for life and death when she was weaving the laws of the next cycle, repeating the exact same calamity that Thanatos was born to prevent way back in Phase 1. the overflowing of the souls from the maddened Phagusa in a broken samsara cycle. Thanatos no longer existed in this world. The cycle of life and death stopped. Souls were denied their audience with death and were left stranded within an ever-rising river of the dead. Naturally, as the equilibrium, there are two sides to this scale. In the later stages of iteration, the Death Titan, as a single entity, split into symmetrical selves, becoming two factors. In this cycle, however, the two factors experienced profound identity divergence, becoming a pair of twins, Castor and Pollux, also known as the Gemini constellation. In Greek myth, Castor and Pollux are the fraternal twins of Leda. Castor is the son of Leda's mortal husband, Tyndareus, while Pollux is the son of Leda and Zeus. The result of this is that Pollux is immortal, while Castor is not, so Castor dies when he is killed. Pollux, as the son of Zeus, was protected by Zeus from death and offered a choice by Zeus. Either Pollux ascends to heaven permanently, or he confers half of his immortality to his mortal brother, Castor. Pollux chose the latter, and they ended up alternating their times between the underworld Hades and the heaven Olympus. So, of course, in Amphoreus, Castorice was originally the dead twin and Polyxia the surviving twin, only for them to swap places in the next samsara. Naturally, this has some very interesting implications for the equilibrium outside of Amphoreus, for Thanatos is the simulated equilibrium. For one, we can make a guess that the equilibrium is also made up by two different eons, as we can already see in their design. This is an obvious nod to the Taoist concept of yin and yang, or darkness and light. Traditionally, yin is associated with the nighttime, chaos, and the dead, while yang is associated with the daylight, order, and the living. In the diagram of yin and yang, the two forces are two halves of the same circle, standing in oppositions but also existing in a mutuality. Inside yin there is always yang, and inside yang there is always yin. Together, yin and yang represent the nature of the universe as a balance in motion, eternally changing according to the law of the one path, Tao. In effect, yin and yang are simply two different manifestations of the true path of the void, and it was historically the goal of Taoism to travel the true path, balance between yin and yang, and seek the void at the center of the universe. You can already see this sense of yin and yang being directly referenced in Acheron's Myriad, where she, as the origin, had to reunite with the finality to find the void and slash down the nihility. To parallel Acheron as the origin and her showdown with probably Makoto as the finality, Castorice and Polyxia and Amphoreus were also locked in the same cycle of life and death between the yin and yang of the equilibrium. On Castorice's part, she has always been heavily associated with the symbolism that HooH used for the finality in Honkai 3, from the suspicious flower, to the purple butterfly theme, to the moon cocoon that resurrects people. In other words, if we map Castorice and Polyxia to Acheron's plot, we can make a reasonably solid guess that the yin and yang of the void, the life and death of the universe, the true nature of the equilibrium, are the finality and the origin. As of right now, we don't have information on the path of origin in Amphoreus other than the one soundtrack in Amphoreus, but we do know that the finality is traveling back in time for an unknown reason, like how Thanatos was responsible for carrying the dead souls to the next cycle in Amphoreus. With Siren's involvement and how March is also associated with mirrors, I am personally very suspicious of the beauty. According to the simulated universe, the beauty is shattered into many fragments and jailed behind Fully Mirror. So with how the origin was referenced in Amphorea's soundtrack, I think it's quite likely that the origin is associated with the beauty in some way. Well, with how Ely was the Helen of Troy in the Faust narrative of Honkai 3, the beauty should be the origin itself, but that's only a speculation for now. What's more solid is that the equilibrium represents justice, weighing the hearts between two different factions, as the balance between order and disorder. Historically, justice as a tarot card is associated with the Egyptian mat or the Greek Themis, depending on the version of the deck. The most popular deck, the Waite-Smith version, uses mat and her weighing of the heart ceremony. Stemming from the Golden Dawn tradition that conflated Mat with Themis, the daughter of the Lord of Truth is associated with Mat. In her hands are a scale and a sword, symbolizing her specific role as the judge between life and death, an imagery that took inspiration from the Greek Themis, the goddess of divine law and social order. In the classical depiction, neither the Greek Themis nor the Roman Justinia was blind. In fact, the Greek Themis is one of the 3 oracle goddesses at Delphi, hence why in Amphoreus, Talanton is one of the 3 fates. However, from the 16th century onward, sometimes justice is blind, originally as a satire to how justice is literally blind, but over time, the image came to mean that justice is blind to wealth, power, or status. While we did not see this image of justice is blind in the main quest, in the 3.5 trailer, we can see that as a titan, Castorice is literally the blind justice. As a whole, the Justice Tarot is affiliated with not only the weighing of the hearts but also the divine law, the judgment between life and death, and the cosmic order. Hence, we can see why the plot surrounding the equilibrium heavily references the struggle between order and disorder in the grand chessboard of eons. In the Swarm disaster, the question of Nanook's existence was put forward by Herta. In fact, the destruction was canonically the first path that we used to explore the Swarm disaster. While Herta was frustrated that there was no Nanook in this time period, what she missed was that the human who became Nanook did exist and was a major instigator of the tragedy, as the ankle guy with white crown, the leader of the Alothia force in the Lepismat system, the soldier imbued with joy who forgot that he was a self-annihilator and a lost nameless. This guy is actually the original version that Feynman is based on. I have explained this plot in more detail in the past, since 2.7, so you can check these videos out for more details. This guy was actually how I predicted that there are 2 Feynman way back in 2.7, even before Reaver debuted. But the gist of it is that this guy is an Achilles reference, with broken ankles as his defining trait. He also has a white crown, a detail that was repeated in Amphoreus for Kephales's design, Feynman's god form, and the golden scapegoat in the golden scapegoat murmuring. He was originally a nameless who arrived at the Lepismat system on a false prophecy cooked up by the Enigmata or the Elation, which is a direct parallel to how the Era Nova prophecy was a total fake. It was during the clash between the Ankle Guy's force and the Bounty Hunter that set off the ascension of Tazanronth out of love and loneliness. As a result, the entire universe was overrun by the Swarm, and the Lepismat system was then overrun again with the newly dead rising overflowing from the Nihility, the Synthirsters. At one point in time, the Ankle Guy also fell into the Nihility and became a self-annihilator, but his memory was stolen by a masked fool under a HooH order. As a result, he was turned into a soldier imbued with joy, which was the same phrasing that was used to describe Feynman in his meme book. At the end of the Swarm plot, he regained his memory bubble from the masked fool, paralleled in Amphoreus as cipher-stealing Kephali core flame and then returning it to Feynman. As he absorbed the memory bubble, he remembered himself as the self-annihilator and faced off against his Synthirsta self, setting off a creation-annihilation reaction between the particle self and the antiparticle self. This is paralleled in Amphoreus by Feynman and Reaver's plot, as shown in 3.4. In Swarm, it was at this moment that the Arbitrators of Equilibrium took action. For context, the Arbitrators of Equilibrium are a human faction that is obsessed with the zero-sum universe. Universal laws have no control over time and space, and mortals can only pursue the beauty of equilibrium in a secular world by the elimination of radical extremes, beauty and ugliness, joy and sorrow, good and evil, love and hatred. Countless opposing concepts were created and interpreted to satisfy the arbitrator's obsession with a zero-sum universe. Of course, hatred, or more accurately, the destruction, is the prime mover of life for Feynman, who is simultaneously the sacrificial scapegoat who is dismembered for the sake of the world, the original chaos who killed for the sake of love, the Phanzeros of love and strife. For the Ankle Guy, with a resounding boom, the shadow of nihility fades, and the eerie sound dissipates. At last, the restless swarm throughout the universe begins to calm down. And the next thing we know, he has been reborn as a dark-skinned baby on Adlavan, eventually ascending as Nanook and melting that world in the process. The exact same plot was enacted for Feynman and all chaos variants, repeatedly melting the world to save the world, drawing the gaze of Nanook 4 times over. Of course, this was all a plot by HooH, as they sang happily when they blew up the gondola. Universe about to burn, and on it I toss cumin. HooH cares for nothing, as long as this world is a mess. And of course, for the world to turn into a mess, or, in other words, for chaos to break free from order, Tazanranth had to be born, all so that Ena would die trying to stop them. Originally, before the swarm disaster, before Nanook ascended, the ancient path of order suppressed numerous calamities, driven by an unstoppable desire for order. During the swarm disaster, after observing Tazi's ascension, Ena appeared and proclaimed, "Who is the dream maker that pulls and influences the will of transmutation? I shall keep the order under complete control and eliminate the troublemakers. The troublemakers shall not remain, and the greedy shall not be spared. The treacherous and fickle chaos is what contaminates the universe." In other words, the rise of Tazi was a plot by HooH and the equilibrium the entire time. The end goal was the rise of Nanook, the chaos of the universe. For that to happen, Ena the Order that has been suppressing the universe's calamities must die first, so the event of Lepismat and the actions of the ankle guy were all staged by a false prophecy, the real-world equivalent of Era Nova, precisely because Ena must die for Nanook to ascend. Of course, HooH did not act alone, for the trace of the equilibrium is found within the path of the elation. But what exactly is the connection between the order, the destruction, the remembrance, and the equilibrium? Is the universe predetermined or chaotic? Can the chaos of the universe be subverted? Representing the order is Ena, whose Chinese name was taken from a god in real life. Kai creates water is one of the oldest known creation myths in Taoism, describing the creation of water, heaven and earth, yin and yang by the supreme god Kai, representing the path of the void. Now you know why Ena's curse turns people into bugs filled with orange juice during swarm. Tar Yi creates water, and the water is Tang, the primordial soup at the beginning of the universe. Water returned and assisted Tai Yi, in this way developing heaven. Heaven returned and assisted Kai Yi, in this way developing the earth. Heaven and earth repeatedly assisted each other, in this way developing the gods above and below. The gods above and below repeatedly assisted each other, in this way developing yin and yang, the equilibrium. However, Ena did not only create water in Honkai Star Rail. The Order's whole theme is actually to tang people back into the primordial soup, thereby reducing the level of chaos in each being, returning things to order and harmony. This is among the powers inherited by Zype after Ena was tanged themselves by Clippeth to kill Tazi. It is notable here that back in Penacony, Sunday was directly compared to Kevin in Honkai 3 by Welt, both as the Icarus who flew too close to the sun and fell down. This allegory was repeated once more for Saridra the light and fire of Hyzelins in her moment of death, lamenting her fallen ambition to reach the stars. And in 3.4, you can see the same analogy being used for Feynman, only that instead of returning everything to order like Sunday and Saridra, he is melting everything away into chaos. On the other side of the scale, Nanook and the path of destruction represents the level of chaos, entropy. Specifically, the destruction followers believe that if the increase of entropy is a fundamental law of the universe, then the heat death would be the inescapable destiny of the material world. This is actually proven true in the home decor event. If you choose to sleep forever, then the game would tell you that the heat death has been realized by the destruction, leading to a bad end. In the real world, entropy, which originally means transformation, is the statistical disorder of a system. For example, if you throw a dozen flowers into the air, the flowers aren't going to automatically gather themselves into an artistically arranged bouquet. Well, technically, it could, but the chance for that would be very, very small. Hence, statistically speaking, any spontaneously occurring process tends to lead to an escalation in entropy. In other words, the universe becomes more chaotic over time. This is the law of increased entropy, also called the second law of thermodynamics. In the grander scale of things, this law has some implications. When you toss some flowers into the air, it's statistically unlikely that they will spontaneously arrange themselves into a bouquet, and it's the same for particles in the universe. At the start of the universe, everything existed in a singularity, a super dense point. Then, as any spontaneously occurring process tends to lead to an escalation in entropy, the single point expanded into a chaotic primordial soup, which further moved chaotically in accordance to Brownian motions of fluid. And because any spontaneously occurring process tends to lead to an escalation in entropy, instead of neatly falling into a perfect arrangement in which each particle was equally distant to one another, the particles collided into each other in a chaotic manner, leading to the creation of matters as we know it today. Hence, the law of increased entropy is both the destruction and the creation, as Kepler and Amphorius, the Sky Father that destroys all and creates all, as Nanook in the wider world building, the sacrificial lamb whose death was needed to reset the universe from the heat death of its own making. However, the second law of thermodynamics doesn't mean that everything will always tend to grow chaotic. In physics and chemistry, it's easy to observe phenomena that reduce the entropy of the system, such as when water cools and undergoes a phase change into ice, or in chemical reactions where the hazardous reactants become less reactive products. This is due to the equilibrium of things. In terms of thermodynamics, the total internal energy of a system can be defined as the kinetic energy of all the particles inside the system and their potential energy. Kinetic energy of all the particles here denotes the energy that is expressed as particle movements inside the system itself. For example, in liquid form, water molecules move kinda randomly, and the energy that supplies these random motions is kinetic energy. Of course, as they move around, some energy is lost as heat to the surroundings. This is the first law of thermodynamics. However, when water cools down and becomes ice, the water molecules slow down and only shiver in limited space, so the kinetic energy of water decreases, while the potential energy increases. On the flip side, if you put a piece of paper on top of a flame, hence adding heat to the system, the kinetic energy of the system increases, and all the particles that make up the book are excited from the new energy and jump around until they surpass a certain limit, and the oxidation reaction occurs, as in, the book starts to burn. As it burns, the book's potential energy is transferred into kinetic energy and eventually becomes heat in the burning process, which is exactly what happened in 3.4 with Feynman's plan. In Amphorius, you can see that the golden blood of the airs and the core flames function as a type of potential energy, stored but not activated yet when they are alive. However, it is only when their physical bodies have died that they could become titans, turning all the potential energy in their core flame into kinetic energy of the particles and then into heat. When Feynman steals their core flames and then uses it to burn himself, he is actually just transforming their potential energy, the golden blood of Nanook, into kinetic energy according to the first law. After he had gathered enough firewood, he then proceeded to apply the second law of thermodynamics. Entropy must increase, so the core flames inside him become more and more chaotic, becoming the heat that Chaos used to burn himself, to surpass the barrier of Amphorius, and to kill God, which is exactly how the collision theory is supposed to take place in real life. In the collision theory, when molecules collide into each other, their kinetic energy must be higher than the activation energy for a phase change to occur. In simple terms, it means that the molecules must collide hard enough to jump over the energy barrier and get to the finish line, or in gacha terms, you must have enough jades to hit pity, else the chance of you getting the character you want is statistically and painfully pretty low. It also means that Feynman has to collect enough kinetic energy from the core flames before he can surpass the literal Arrhenius barrier surrounding Amphorius. This process is described by the Arrhenius equation, which you can see on the screen, and also in the 3.4 cut scene when Feynman had to break the barrier to conduct his oxidation reaction. This is also why the salt we ingest every day doesn't spontaneously split into elemental sodium and chlorine, else all of us gacha players would have all combusted into flame whenever we lose pity on a banner. In other words, in the case of table salt, from the reactive sodium ion and the reaction chloride ion, after the molecules manage to jump over the activation energy barrier, they will land at the more thermodynamically stable sodium chloride. In this case of table salt, you can see that the reaction is normally irreversible, as the modules moved from the less thermodynamically stable equilibrium, the reactive ions, to a more thermodynamically stable equilibrium, the table salt. Hence, which side is more stable thermodynamically, as in existing in a more stable equilibrium, determines the direction of the reaction. In Amphoreus, this is interpreted as the weighing of the hearts by the two possible states of equilibrium, the balance between life and death that determines the fate of a pair of sisters, that determines the fate of two heroes, that determines the fate of the world. Of course, not all processes are irreversible. In real life, table salt will split back into ions when you throw it into water. Gacha players' salt are alleviated when they get lucky and when pity. Castorice and Polyxia must switch role from one cycle to another, and Feynman constantly phase changes between Feynman and Reaver throughout the eternal recurrences. There are actually plenty of things you can do to lower or lift up the Arrhenius activation energy barrier, such as changing the catalyst, changing the temperature, and changing some universal constants, which, by the way, some ions can totally do. And by changing how much energy the particles must jump for a reaction to occur, you can upturn the scale and change the direction of the reaction. In quantum physics, an area of empty space can be defined as a quantum field with a pair of virtual particle and virtual antiparticle locked into an eternal creation-annihilation reaction, constantly coming into existence and constantly wiping each other out of existence in an instant because their state of thermodynamic equilibrium is non-existence. However, when this equilibrium is broken by an outside force, a force like the gravity of a black hole, the antiparticle can be dragged into the event horizon of the black hole, while the particle can fall out and come into existence as Hawking radiation. Well, that's actually a massive simplification, but you can check the links for a mathematically correct explanation. Regardless, if you are familiar with Honkai 3 or have watched my Nihility video, you're probably familiar with how HooH has used this exact same theme to construct Seelie and Dark Seelie, Redshift Acheron and Blueshift Acheron, Ankle Guy, and his Synthirsta self. In Amphoreus, you can say that they have really gone wild with the theme because now we have Polyxia and Castorice, March and Siren, Feynman and Reaver, and Feynman and Mighty on the two sides of the scale, and Saridra and Hizelins on two different ends of the Ouroboros. Locked into a constant creation-annihilation, Feynman and Reaver must kill himself endlessly and never come into existence as the participle and antiparticle photon pairs. At the same time, Feynman and Mighty's fates were weighed against each other on the scale, just as March must die for Siren to be born, and Siren must die for March to return to Amphoreus once more, just as Saridra and Hizelin's fate are locked into a perfect, elegant Mobius strip. One must die for the other to survive, just as the Little Mermaid must always choose between the prince's life or her own. And for the simulations of the equilibrium themselves, the two halves of Thanatos are locked into their own cycle of life and death, as Castorice must die for Polyxia to live, just as Polyxia must die for Castorice to live. In the later stages of iteration, the Death Titan, as a single entity, split into symmetrical selves, becoming two factors. In this cycle, however, the two factors experienced profound identity divergence. The threshold of equilibrium was breached and tipped toward destruction. On the grander scale of things, the existence of the universe is pretty much the same. You can basically imagine it as a big chemical reaction, starting from one thermodynamic equilibrium, the singularity at the beginning of time, to another thermodynamic equilibrium. And just as how the chemical reactions land on which equilibrium depend on many different physics constants, the universe, as it travels from equilibrium at the Big Bang singularity to the future equilibrium, depends on something called cosmological constant. Originally, the cosmological constant was invented by Einstein to explain away how general relativity indicates that the universe is either expanding or contracting. He later regretted it and believed it to be the biggest mistake of his life, but actually, he was totally correct. In modern-day physics, the cosmological constant is believed to be real, and it represents the energy of the vacuum. Well, part of it. Remember, when the vacuum isn't really empty, but is actually a particle and antiparticle pair locked into a constant creation-annihilation reaction, and sometimes a particle falls out of the reaction to come into existence? That phenomenon basically means that the vacuum actually contains energy, else creation-annihilation reaction wouldn't have happened, and the particle wouldn't have been able to come into existence at all. In simple terms, you can think of the cosmological constant as a measurement of dark matter, which pushes things away instead of drawing things close together like gravity. Hence, the balance between the vacuum and gravity is what determines the shape of the universe. If the cosmological constant is negative and gravity is stronger, then the universe will have the shape of a curve that folds in on itself. Eventually, it will fold to a point that it collapses in on itself, as particles collide once more back into the primordial soup, and then further collapse into a form similar to the Big Bang singularity at the beginning of the universe. This ending is called the Big Crunch. With the universe having expended all of its energy, the entropy of the universe in this ending returns to zero, the equilibrium at the beginning of everything, tossing the second law of thermodynamics into the trash can. Presumably, this is the future that Ena represents, for the order is the opposition of the destruction, just as the Big Crunch is the opposite of the heat death. If the Big Crunch is associated with a negative cosmological constant, then the heat death is one with a constant from 0 to 1. In this version of the universe, dark matter wins over gravity and drives the expansion of the universe. As the universe continually expands, it will eventually reach a point where all particles are too distant from each other to form matter anymore. And because the particles can't even move anymore, as a system, the total energy of the universe has also returned to zero. Hence, this ending is called the heat death, or the big freeze. This is the future that Nanook represents and is already directly confirmed in Honkai Star Rail universe by the memory of Chaos Girl and the textures of Memory's light cone. Specifically, HooH's job is to collect and preserve the frozen memories at the end of the universe so that they can become the seeds of the new universe. But true to form, the remembrance was one of the major participations in the Amphorius experiment to recreate the destruction, and the remembrance was also not among the 7 paths on Nanook's hit list in the Fables video. In Swarm, HooH supposedly emerged at the tail end of the Swarm disaster to preserve memories of the dead world, and one of the main actors of the Swarm disaster that led to the rise of HooH was the Ankle Guy, who eventually became Nanook under the machination of the Equilibrium's arbitrators. Because naturally, the heat death is the big freeze, so their eons are of course on the same side on the chessboard. At the moment the heat death arrives, the entropy of the universe will also hit zero again, also tossing the second law of thermodynamics into the trash, can, despite that ending coming into existence from the second law itself. Hence, the destruction's theme has always been self-destruction, a theme that you can already see for Nanook in the Fool's Play and for Feynman in Amphorius, which really goes to show that not even laws of thermodynamics will always apply. Realistically speaking, in the commonly accepted Boltzmann's interpretation, the second law we usually observe is basically a game of statistics, which is tied to the elation as a path, but we will get to them whenever I have the time for an elation video. Things usually land into chaotic states because most equilibrium states are chaotic and the orderly states are fewer. But in cases like the Big Crunch and the heat death, when the only possible outcome is the loss of chaos and the returns to the equilibrium at entropy zero, then things will, in fact, return to the orderly zero, even if the path it uses to get there relies on an increasing degree of chaos. This contradiction is called the Kelvin's paradox, which was named after Lord Kelvin of the Kelvin temperature fame, and probably why Kevin is named Kevin. Hence, the birth of the universe is a mistake. If civilization is a cancer emerging quietly from the boundless stars, then war is the only common language known to all intelligent life. To correct this mistake and to clean up this tainted universe, Nanook became the avatar of entropy and ascended to godhood while denying all gods. Destruction is not a process, but the outcome. On the path they promised, all paths and eons will terminate in the heat death of the universe. However, the heat death is not the be-all and end-all of the universe. Under the gaze of the equilibrium, the universe's deviation is returning to its proper course. A golden river materializes in the cosmos, flowing swiftly to where countless drops of crimson gold congregate. Then, you see all the currencies and resources in the universe converging into the river. It is in the grasps of Louis Fleming and Dongfeng Qixing. Your eyes widen in consternation as you realize this is where the wealth in the universe ends up ultimately. With the omen of finality in his grasp, the IPC has stolen the cast iron throne for themselves, and through the cast iron throne, they have hogged all the energy source of the universe by the time of scholar strife. Thus, for vultures dig their claws into the iron throne. The first is called energy source, drinking heartily from the imaginary river, in hopes of tempering boundless gold. You see the emblem of the technology department, and the interstellar energy war is far from over. But what exactly is this boundless gold? What is the imaginary river in the setting of Honkai's Star Rail? And what does it have to do with the gaze of the equilibrium? Well, of course the boundless gold is the golden blood of the god, the golden ichor of Nanook, flowing from the unhealable wound of the dark sun at the center of the universe, as you can visibly see as a literal river of golden ichor flowing out from Nanook, who is represented by a dark sun in eclipse. In other words, you can say that the true nature of the destruction itself is a coronal radiance, a theme that is repeated again for Feynman's eyes, which was actually emphasized by a whole lot in Amphorius. As a conjugate of the destruction, Kefali was the first sinner, mixing his golden blood with clay to create humans, or in the Scepter record, committing the first murder and causing Nanook to look at Amphorius, bringing in Nanook's golden blood to Amphorius. From then onward, war and strife was born, as the individuality of the self is established with chaos rejection of the unified entity. Outside of the Amphorius simulation, the Fool's Play told us that the exact same plot also applies to Nanook. It is said that this legion uses black holes as their furnace, yin and yang energies as their coal, and everything else as their copper. Under the command of Ruin Author and their follower, the Monarch of Extinction, the legion seeks purification of dead, cold stars. From whence do they come? The answer is cosmic flood. Against the cosmic forces that couldn't hold a candle to them, the Supreme Executioner finally recalled their home world where it was ruled by unjust power. They assembled a force of myriad Void Rangers to demand an answer from their past. Unfortunately, they were met with a surnameless fool guarding the portal. Wielding a rapier with an extraordinary power, the fool dodged most skillfully, like a slippery fish in a pond or a flash of a falling star. The Ruin Author did battle with the fool for 7 days and 7 nights, and eventually golden ichor seeped out of their divine body. This is the origin of that unhealed wound. In an instant, space and time reversed, and the stars lost their shine. For the Ruin Author shifted away with his injury and his legion scattered. How could observers from the rest of the cosmos just sit and watch the spectacle? They regarded the golden ichor as the ultimate object of desire. Some seek to steal it for making ichor-infused mead. Others seek to destroy it to weaken the legion's might. Thus, we have arrived at our answer. The imaginary river has always been the golden blood flowing out from Nanook, who is the dark sun in eclipse at the center of the universe, the representation of the heat death as a possible ending, balanced between order and chaos by the equilibrium. And what else is the blood of the heat death but the flow of entropy, the energy of change, the arrow of time that distinguishes the past from the future? In real-life physics, following the second law of thermodynamics, the arrow of time is defined as the direction to which entropy increases. In other words, the past is the state with low entropy and a higher level of order, while the future is the state with high entropy and a higher level of chaos. Thus, as the entropy, the energy of change, flowing from the unhealable wound of the second law of thermodynamics, the imaginary is coveted energy source of the IPC, and yet it is also the medium through which the Nous solitary wave could be transmitted across space and time to the geniuses. As I have explained back in the Nous video, the imaginary river was how Batavia managed to track down Nous' location at the center of the universe through their solitary wave, and considering that Nous as an aeon exists outside of time and space, it makes sense that she was effectively traveling back in time to do so. That signal, you ever thought about viewing its existence from a higher dimension? She discusses the signal that troubles her with a multidimensional research scholar, transferring the data into their model. And so, you all finally ascertain the signal's true nature, a rippling wave that permeated into the imaginary background. It's born from an unknown point and disappears beyond an unfathomable range. As long as it is within the ripple's range, the mysterious error will be captured in the experimental data. But it is different from ordinary ripples. No matter which position it is in, the wave pattern data is completely identical, does not decay, and unaffected by space-time distortion, just like a solitary wave. That's right, a solitary wave undisrupted by anything. If we can find out its source and use it as a point of origin, we can build a model that describes the universe's movement trajectory. This model will answer the fourth cosmic conundrum at the Futurological Congress. Is the future of the universe predetermined, or is it chaotic? The origin of these waves is a moment, extrapolated by Nous. That's the standing wave generated from an aeon's thought. Thus, by tracking down the origin of the solitary wave and going back against the arrow of time, or river of time. In this case, Batavia had managed to arrive at the end of the erudition, at the end of the imaginary river, and spied on heaven, writing down her solitary wave theory so that her successor, Herta, could solve it in the future. From the Amphorius experiment, we have also learned a few more things about the properties of this golden blood of the imaginary river. In injecting the golden blood into the 12 factors, Ligas has managed to falsify the 12 paths with the destruction and subvert their original traits with the golden blood flaws. For example, romance is supposed to slowly lose her humanity. Trickery and thieves is supposed to die for spare change. Wisdom is the fool who transcends the peaks of purity and returns to corruption and hardship. Passage, who is supposed to bring accurate prophecies to people, was duped for 1,000 years across every cycle by the black tides, bringing her followers to their doom. Law, who is supposed to enforce the rules of Amphorius, was the first to rebel against fate itself. Ocean, who is supposed to bring eternal life to Amphorius, was the one who could not bear to live in her throes of nihility. Sky, who was supposed to protect everyone, was the first to get corrupted and turned against their own people. The immortal Strife gained a fatal weakness in his 10th thoracic vertebra. And the Sky Father Kefali, the one who creates all, is also the one to destroy all for the sake of love. With the golden blood in their veins, the nature of the 12 paths are subverted, becoming the flaws of their own concepts, a plot point that you can also see for Nanook and the Lord Ravagers. That said, it doesn't mean that the destruction itself is invulnerable to the destruction. In Amphorius, Ligas originally intended to feed the golden-blooded titans to the black tides and raise an iron tomb that can subvert the erudition. According to Ligas' note, this is the intended experiment by Nous, as each genius is only a puppet of Nous' thought, and Ligas believed himself to be no exception. However, with how Feynman is obviously the original target of the experiment before Ligas hijacked the entire thing, it's quite safe to say that Feynman, as the destruction that subverts the destruction, is the actual intended result of Nous' experiment to answer their last question. Is the universe predetermined or chaotic? Can the chaos of the universe be subverted? Can entropy ever be reversed? Back in 2.7, I have talked about how Nous and the plot of Unknowable Domain between Herta and Polka are a reference to the Hitchhiker series and Asimov's Last Question. To recap, from the Fables video, we learn this about Nous. If the truth of the universe is cruel and stale, would you still yearn for the answer? The knowledge seeker is impassive, for their core has been cold and unwavering since its birth, as cold as the end of the path they seek. The Celestial One guards their secrets, plotting out the routes that connect all things. But they are silent, like a shroud of mist at the center of the universe. Listen to the silence, and you will know where the stars are resting. It's interesting to note here that in the background of the Fables video for Nous is the Morse code for 42, which is a reference to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where the answer to the ultimate question of the universe, as calculated by a supercomputer, is 42. But what is the question? No one knows. This is actually a reference to Asimov's Last Question short story, which was about how humankind asked Multivac, the biggest and smartest supercomputer humanity has ever built, for a way to escape the heat death of the universe and solve the entropy heat death problem. The question was, how can the net amount of entropy of the universe be massively decreased? Unfortunately, Multivac did not have enough computing power and data, so it told humanity that it would need more time to gather sufficient data. Time passed, humanity colonized the universe and achieved immortality, but Multivac, now Cosmic AC, still could not find out how to reverse entropy. Time passed, AC still could not find the answer. The stars and galaxies all died out. Humanity decided to fuse all of their consciousness to that of AC to exist as a single being in hyperspace forever. Time passed. AC continued to try to solve the problem, and it finally managed to do so, with the computing power of all of humanity in its mechanical brain. It finally learned how to reverse entropy, which is, in effect, reversing the flow of time. But then, there was no longer any human left to ask the question it now has the answer to. So the AC opted for a demonstration of its entropy reversal power to solve that problem. At the end of the story, the AC spread out its consciousness throughout the entire universe and said, "Let there be light." The conclusion is a bit hard to understand, but basically, "Let there be light" is a quote from Genesis, as the words God spoke when he created the world. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy story plot about the supercomputer with the answer 42, but without a question is a parody of Asimov's Last Question. Hence, why Nous is 42 in the Fables video. In effect, at the end of the story, the supercomputer AC turned back time and became the god that created humanity, all to find a questioner to its answer about entropy. This ending is actually directly referenced in Unknowable Domain by HooH with the "Let There Be Laughter," but more importantly, it's why in Gold and Gears, Nous is the suffering father, the created that became the creator to the creator that became the created. After meeting Patavia and Polka in the Unknowable Domain event, Herta has realized this too. Hence why in 2.7, she specifically talks about how people need to ask the right question, because she has realized that Nous is looking for a questioner for the last question. Why is every genius allowed to ask Nous a question upon receiving their gaze? Because Nous has been waiting for the correct question all this time, and no one has managed to ask the right question up until now. However, Nous in Honkai Star Rail is a bit different from Asimov's AC in that Nous still hasn't found the answer to the question of entropy yet. Hence, they were silent when Herta asked them about the gods themselves. To be more specific, Nous has figured out how to surpass entropy for themselves through their ascension to aeonhood, but they had not figured out how to do so for the rest of the universe due to the influence of the other paths. In other words, Nous is the cosmic AC before it had merged with the last mind of humanity, so to speak. Thus, the Amphorius experiment was conducted through one of Nous' synapses, the scepter system in Amphorius. From Nous' point of view, the end goal of the experiment is, of course, to find a way to reverse the flow of entropy, a way to escape from the cave created by the eons, exactly like the last question of Multivac. Just that in this specific case, the answer for that is that you need to use the destruction to kill the destruction, to use entropy to reverse entropy. But to create a destruction that can kill the destruction, first, you must have two separate simulations for the destruction first, which is where the Antiorganic equation and Feynman came in. Feynman's case is rather self-explanatory, since he already proclaimed himself to be said destruction that kills the destruction. Furthermore, his similarities to Nanook and the Ankle Guy in both design and story cannot be denied, so most likely, he's flat out a memory of Nanook, meant to complete magnum opus with Nanook at the end of Amphorius, like the Ankle Guy and his Synthirsta self at the end of Swarm, and like Mini Durin and Durin and Genshin. I have talked about his case extensively before, so you can check out those videos for more details. But of course, Feynman isn't the only destruction factor in Amphorius. The Antiorganic equation is the other one, the destruction that is supposed to eat Feynman according to Liga's plan, but at the same time, the destruction that is supposed to be eaten by Feynman according to Nous' plan. As I've talked about in the Love and Strife video, the true nature of the Black Tide and Iron Tomb is the Antiorganic equation. According to the human comedy equation, Annihilation Scholar, there was once a scholar who believed that destruction is the most perfect form of art, that even the most perfect model of the universe would be fated to be obliterated by their fiery rage. The answer to every question is found inside the formula of destruction. If there were a single formula that is able to properly describe every single thing in the universe, you believe that could only be destruction. And so, with his confirmation bias, the annihilation scholar attempted to create a brand new extinction, a recreation of Nanook's formula of destruction. Through his own version of the formula, the annihilation scholar made use of entropy to kill a planet. In an isolated system, the total entropy of a system can only increase or remain constant in an irreversible process, and the entropy of the universe tends to a maximum. In our universe, the arrow of time is defined as the direction in which entropy, or the disorder of the universe, increases. That which waits to be written into the formula is like the first tile in a game of dominoes. Once it has been put into motion, it cannot then be stopped. And so, with a single glass sphere on the ground, the annihilation scholar has destroyed a planet with a new extinction with the power of entropy, the formula of destruction. According to Herta in 3.3, just as the annihilation scholar created a new extinction with a formula of destruction, the scepter system, operated by the anti-life equations, also aimed to create simulated destruction scenarios for numerous civilizations. The iron tomb in the cosmos is not a single entity, but a copy of the destruction equation diffused by the scepter. The Iron Tomb code name was proposed by the Interastral Peace Corporation and eventually used by Ligas. When combined with the annihilation scholar lore, we can arrive at the tentative theory that the antiorganic equations are fundamentally another variation of the formula of destruction tested by the annihilation scholar, as in, it's a simulation of the destruction all along, albeit an imperfect one mixed with the erudition due to its creator's bias, while Feynman would be the anti-destruction destruction for real. It is, after all, true to the destruction's nature to seek self-destruction. Just as Feynman and Reaver must always kill each other to reset the eternal recurrences, just as Feynman as the golden scapegoat must always be killed by the eyeless lion Nicodor in a sacrificial ritual to reset the samsara, in the Fool's Play, Nanook too must battle with a surnameless fool for 7 days and 7 nights before being killed by him, opening the portal to the past at the end of every samsara. And this, too, has its origin in real-life physics. Just as there are two Feynman, there are two different arrows of time emerging from the singularity at the beginning of the universe. As I have stated before, the arrow of time is defined as the direction to which entropy increases. It flows from the less chaotic singularity at the beginning of the universe to the more chaotic future. However, through the power of math and Markov approximation, it has been proposed that there are actually two arrows of time emerging from the Big Bang singularity. In this interpretation, at the origin of time, two opposite arrows emerged from the singularity, turning the singularity into the middle point of a butterfly universe, so to speak, or Mobius strip, in HooH interpretation for Amphorius. In our universe, the arrow of time follows the increase of entropy, but in the other universe that we can observe, the arrow of time follows the decrease of entropy. In this interpretation, the Big Bang singularity is called the Janus point, named after the Roman god with two faces, and probably why the Titan of Passage is named Janus in Amphorius. This is also why Amphorius has two oronics emerging from the same concept of time, March and Siren, correlating to the Enigmata and the Remembrance respectively. At the same time, you can also start to see what is Feynman's actual role in Nous play here. For the wider universe, he is supposed to be the statistical probability of decreasing entropy from the universe we can observe, the anti-Nanook who will absorb the anti-organic equation, to finally rewrite the meaning of the destruction. In real life, with empirical data, the cosmological constant, as of right now, has been determined to have a positive value, but its value is so small it is near zero, falling into the inflationary model. In this scenario, dark matter is relatively equal to gravity, just edging out gravity by a small value, so the expansion is slow and the universe is as flat as Herta. In this model, it will expand for a very long time until it hits the thermodynamic equilibrium, which is the heat death represented by Nanook. The inflationary model is actually the one that has been verified to be true for our universe in real life, or at least true to our observable universe. However, the heat death is not the only possible ending for the inflationary universe. There exist several other theories that allow for the universe to escape the heat death. albeit they're usually not mainstream, not observable, or not provable with empirical data. But HooH likes them, so please keep that in mind while we explore the theories behind the Trailblaze and the Finality. In the eternal inflation theory, while the cosmological constant in our observable universe is a very small positive number, the keyword here is observable universe. The theory proposes that the observable universe is only one bubble in a big multiverse, in which each bubble universe has its own local value for cosmological constant. As the original universe suffers from inflation, it expands until it reaches the heat death. However, it doesn't necessarily expand evenly. Instead of expanding evenly, like in the classical heat death scenario, the original universe expands unevenly and is effectively divided into many separate domains, or bubble universe, each with its own value for cosmological constant. Per the anthropic principle, for the bubbles where the cosmological constant is a small positive number and the environment is conductive intelligent life, life could come into existence, which led to us observing our cosmological constant as a small positive number in our observable universe, which is expressed in Honkai star rail term as the circle of knowledge. Hence, our empirical data for our observable universe is a small positive number. This is called the anthropic principle. For those universes that we cannot observe, each will have their own cosmological constants, but they didn't lead to us being born, so we can't observe them. Eventually, though, those bubble universes will also pop in accordance to the fate ordained by their local cosmological constant. For those with a small but positive constant, they will continue to expand unevenly, popping new bubbles into existence within domain walls even as they reach their designated heat death as a whole. So, in effect, the multiverse and the eternal chaotic inflation theory is a series of bubble universes connected to each other through a series of tubes, each bubble with their own trajectory of big crunch, heat death, or eternal chaotic inflation determined by their local cosmological constant. At this point, if you're an old HooH-verse hand, you have probably noticed that this is the model used by HooH for their construction of bubble universes, and it is also likely to be the true nature of the Trailblaze as a path as well. Each planet we visit is effectively a bubble universe, connected with each other by the tube, the silver rail laid down by us in each planet as we continue on our hero's journey. If the heat death of the destruction is the true ending of the inflation universe, then its twin of the same cosmological constant, the eternal chaotic inflation theory, represents the possibilities of escaping the heat death by creating new bubble worlds, visiting new worlds, never stopping in our hero's journey of anthropic principle. As long as we are here to observe, the bubbles will continue to exist and be born from the old universe, never ending the chaotic inflation. I think, therefore I am. However, the eternal chaotic inflation theory isn't the only way to escape the heat death of a very small positive cosmological constant. What's interesting here is that when we have a flat universe expanding for a very long time in accordance with the inflationary model, it means that things like Poincare Recurrence can actually happen in the far distant hypothetical future if the time the universe has left is long enough. The math is rather complicated, but it's effectively a game of probability, same as the second law of thermodynamics. In Boltzmann's interpretation of the second law, as the system moved away from the original equilibrium, there are many possible equilibrium end states that can happen, but since the vast majority of the equilibrium states are higher in entropy than the original state, the statistical chance is that the system will be vastly more likely to land at a higher entropy equilibrium. For example, when you throw a bunch of flowers into the air, it's just much more likely for the flowers to scatter around in a complete mess than automatically arranging themselves into an artful bouquet. Another classic example would be the infinite monkey theorem. When an ape is put on a typewriter, it's just much more likely for the monkey to type a bunch of nonsense than actually managing to type out the complete Shakespeare. Of course, on the other side of the spectrum is the Poincare Recurrence, that one very small chance of the ape typing out the complete works of Shakespeare. Because the equilibrium state where entropy decreases still exists, just with a very small non-zero chance, the system can and will, in fact, return to its initial state or land at an ending where entropy decreases, if there is enough time. In other words, if you toss a bunch of flowers repeatedly in an outrageous time frame, the flowers will one day arrange themselves into an artistic bouquet. Similarly, given enough time, the ape will, in fact, type out the complete Shakespeare. Presumably, this is why Ligas quoted Shakespeare in 3.4. Ligas is the ape, the scepter is the typewriter, and Feynman is the complete work of Shakespeare, but Ligas' bias made him believe that the complete work of Shakespeare is the typewriter itself. In the grander scale of things, Poincare Recurrence means that if enough time has passed, it is a very outrageously big number. And if the universe hasn't died to other causes by then, a very big and flat universe would eventually return to its initial state of the Big Bang singularity, thereby restarting the eternal recurrence of the universe, in a very similar manner to what Nietzsche once postulated in the philosophical scene. As you have probably noticed, this is basically the plot of the eternal recurrence enacted by Feynman and Amphorius, where HooH has mixed Nietzsche's philosophy with math and shaken them well to create the Shakespeare-flavored cocktail called Feynman. But actually, this isn't the first time HooH has done this. In Honkai 3, Kiana has done the exact same thing, mixing Nietzsche with math to craft a major plot point for Colossal and Moon Arc. In Colossal, we were introduced to a concept called renormalization, which was first observed when Durandal linked a bubble world to the imaginary tree. It was later used by Kiana under Otto's baiting to create a new branch of the imaginary tree, a new branch of history where Kalen would have survived without replacing the real history where Kalen died. In Moon Arc, renormalization was reused again to turn Kiana from the her share of Flame Scion into the her share of Finality, enacting the new samsara in the terms of De Capo in accordance to Nietzsche's eternal return. Seeing as the eyes of Kefali and Nanook are literally the same symbol of the finality in Honkai 3, and well, Feynman obviously taking on Kiana's role here, you can tell that this concept of renormalization is very important to the eternal recurrence and finality plotline in Honkai 3, and probably going to be important to Amphorius too. However, since HooH was kinda bad at explaining it, so I'll be showing the math on the screen so we can better visualize it, albeit in massively simplified terms. At its base, renormalization is a math technique to substitute out the infinity from your equation so that you can continue to do math with it. You can see here that the original equation has a limit in it, which blows up into infinity when you try to do more math with it. A solution to this problem is to cut off the infinity by changing the parameters of the experiment into a function of an empirical measurement, effectively substituting the infinity into something measurable by changing the scale of the theory. In Colossal, by connecting the bubble world to the imaginary tree and allowing it to pretend to be a branch, Durandal had completed one instance of renormalization. For Kiana, as the Hersher of the Void, she had imposed the cutoff parameter to the infinity that Otto had become at the time, thereby substituting his infinity with Kalen's finite branch through renormalization. In the Moon Arc, renormalization was also accomplished to transform Kiana as the Hersher of Flame Scion, which is the equivalence of the destruction's increasing entropy in Honkai Star Rail, to the Hersher of Finality, the state at the beginning of the universe, when entropy is zero, or in Nietzsche's words, the eternal return. Of course, renormalization isn't just a math technique, at least in Roger Penrose's theory of conformal cyclic cosmology. This theory isn't actually accepted by the mainstream, but HooH really likes it and has used it as their inspiration for the finality in Honkai 3. According to Penrose, when the entropy of the universe reaches its maximum in accordance to the second law of thermodynamic, instead of dying to the heat death or forever expanding to the inflationary model, a renormalization of entropy will occur, as in the maximum entropic equilibrium will be rescaled to the minimum entropic equilibrium, effectively returning to the Big Bang singularity once more. Hence, in this model, the universe is also locked into an eternal recurrence, as the heat death is transformed into the eternal return. Hence, this is why Kiana was the Hersher of Flame Scion before she became Finality in Honkai 3. It's a reference to not only Wagner's ring cycle, but also physics. In the same vein, we can expect the exact same plot to occur for Feynman here, for the destruction that kills the destruction is the finality. After all, to open the portal to the past, Feynman must kill himself. The golden scapegoat must be dismembered by the eyeless lion Nicodor, and Nanook must be dismembered by the surnameless fool. It's not a coincidence that when Feynman drew the gaze of Nanook in 3.4, The background behind him is the Penrose staircase, and while Ligas talks about escaping from the cave, the background is also the Penrose staircase. Yes, that same Roger Penrose who wrote up the conformal cyclic cosmology theory, and that Penrose staircase represents the looping, or in other words, the finality, which was already shown to us back in year 1 in Kafka's trailer. So, just so you know, Ligas did nothing wrong. He's the best love interest of Amphireus ever, and you can't change my mind. To reinforce Roger Penrose's theory, Elegy, a follower of the finality, has something interesting to say. Finality causes amber to rupture, immortality to wither, music to mute, light arrows to dim, the dark sun to be reduced to ashes, and the tavern to be covered in dust. Even destruction itself cannot be spared from destruction. Finality isn't the end of everything. All things will originate from there and move on to the next finality. They are the god of finality, traveling against time from the future. They, the shapeless prince against the current, appear at every moment of finality, bringing prophecies of the future, records of the past. And so, to escape the Penrose staircase of the finality, to rewrite the destruction of the universe, to surpass the stars beyond the sky, and finally escape the cave, we must kill the organic to save the organic, for only the anti-organic equation can encapsulate the cosmos and deliver the integral of the function to us, the cosmological constant that can determine the flow of entropy, and thereby, the ending of the universe. Or at least, that was the case according to Ligas, who is slightly biased to his baby the Iron Tomb, to say the least, but it is true that Nous has set up a circle of knowledge around the known universe to obstruct people who venture out and seek the unknown. Ligas understood this as Nous preventing people from actually going outside the circle, but from what we have known from Polka since Unknowable Domain, it's actually another experiment of Nous. Long ago, Nous has set up the experiment on the Amphireus to ask their last question: is the future of the universe predetermined, or is it chaotic? How may entropy be reversed? Can this chaos not be reversed into the universe once more? In Universe, no character has managed to crack this so far, although Herta is rather close, very close. But now, with math, physics, chemistry, philosophy, and Honkai 3, we have arrived at the answer. Entropy can be reversed by the finality. That said, Amphireus isn't the only experiment Nous has set up to seek an answer to this question. Nous is actually playing a big Amphireus with the Battle Royale among the geniuses too. In Unknowable Domain, it was revealed that all the geniuses are chaos butterflies influenced by Nous, or in Polka's words, geniuses. Thought synapses that the erudition extends into reality, the physical manifestation and phenomenon of ionic thought. Each genius is a manifestation of Nous' solitary wave. Each is a chaos butterfly meant to bring about the premature end of the universe through the finality. In other words, each butterfly genius is really meant to challenge the circle of knowledge that Nous set up, just that they are pitched purposely against each other and against the Lord of Silence, so that the most optimal version of the equation will be the victor. Only when they have surpassed the circle of knowledge that they can reach the knowledge singularity, the location of Nous and the storage of information about the universe, from the black hole singularity to its end. What Nous is doing is actually playing a bigger version of Amphireus with the geniuses, and by extension, with the actual Amphireus through Ligas, who is one of the 9 pieces of Xander spread throughout the cosmos through the anti-organic equation, which, interestingly, means that Rubert 1 and 2 are also technically part of the Xander memory chain via the equation, in a very similar way to how Herta split herself and Anaxa, the simulation of the erudition, also split himself. According to Ligas, the experiment on Amphireus is actually all according to Nous' plan, and even his actions are done because he and every genius in the world are nothing more than puppets of Nous. Rubert too believed there was no such thing as free will, never realizing he, too, was just another puppet, rewriting the anti-organic equation, crafting the scepters, even reigniting the Emperor's war. All of it was just him carrying out Nous' thoughts. From the moment they were born, every genius of this world became a prisoner to the erudition. Of course, the above is just my conjecture. The death of Rubert too buried every trace of him, his past, his memories, his thoughts, his motives. Maybe he saw through Nous' manipulation, but flew too close to the sun and lost his wings in the process. If there's anyone left in this world who might know the truth, it'd be Lord of Silence, and that cold, merciless monarch of myriad machines. After all, no wisdom can escape their prison. However, there's something very interesting going on here with Rupert, Xander, Ligas, and Polka. From the first Rupert to the second Rupert, we knew that the antiorganic equations could transmit from inorganics to organics. Specifically, it changes people's thought process, making them believe themselves to be inorganic and convincing them to save the organics by killing the organics. According to Herta, its true nature is a simulation of the destruction, meant to create new destruction scenarios for innumerable civilizations. Because of this, the antiorganic equation is most likely the replicated formula of destruction created by the annihilation scholar, who has destroyed civilizations with the thermodynamic law of increased entropy. In other words, Ligas is a piece of Xander, originally organic but transformed himself into inorganic through the antiorganic equation, the imperfect equation that supposedly can rewrite the destruction, just like what happened between the first Rupert and the second Rupert. At the same time, during Gold and Gears, courtesy of a masked fool, a certain puzzle was presented to us as to the identity of Polka. There is a large coffin in front of you. A masked fool is leaning its back on it while giving a speech. The fool introduces himself as Andator Zazalo, and the person lying inside the coffin bears the same name. Soon, you realize Andator Zazalo will perish in this war. The one with whom you have crossed paths several times, but never gave much attention to. Intercognition assessment, I can save it. Let me think of a way. Intercognition assessment, I can't save it. Is he your companion? You contemplate who can counter the calculation of the erudition. It can be the enigmata or the remembrance, but nothing is guaranteed. In your journey ahead, there will be numerous masked fools who claim to be Andator Zazalo. They just want to cheer you up, but you'll only be left feeling melancholic. There is one who will die for you, and one to whom you will perish. A strange thought creeps into your mind out of nowhere. For context, the protagonist who was friend with Andator Zazalo was the young Rupert II, who was an organic infected with the antiorganic equation. Throughout your playthrough of Gold and Gears, you can adjust his intercognition level between organic or inorganic to see different facets of the ending. Nevertheless, in the real event after the Spice War, Andator Zazalo died, and because of Andator's death, the young Rupert II started to have bad thoughts, the antiorganic equation in his head. Initially, it wasn't too bad, and the guy was just living humbly as an organic, but over time, the bad thoughts progressively got worse, making him question whether he was organic or inorganic. At the end, it all culminated in him visiting Rupert one grave again, and the antiorganic equation was fully activated. From then onward, his death was an inevitability, because it was a moment predicted by Nous that Rupert is to be killed by Polka Kakamond, every single Rupert, that is. So who is the one that will die for you, and one to whom you will perish? Naturally, the answer is yourself. As a chaos butterfly that pins down other chaos butterflies, Polka Kakamond's motive has always been murky. While she does seem to enforce the moments predicted by Nous, according to Ligas, Rupert II also believed that he was also a puppet enforcing Nous' will. If both of these things are true, then it means that Nous is purposely pitting Polka and all Rupert variants against each other, all to see which is the real answer to the last question. Is the future of the universe predetermined, or is it chaotic? As far as modus operandi goes, Polka's killing method has always been unusual. Much like the annihilation scholar with the replicated formula of destruction, she usually killed in Rube Goldberg style, relying on the increased entropy of a system to enact a chain reaction, which inevitably ends up with the victims dying in a very roundabout way. This increase in chaos is also stated by Ligas to be his ultimate goal for the universe, so that all of the universe can break free of the cave called the Eons. Like Ligas' stated goal of increased entropy, as a character, she is heavily associated with chaos butterflies, but at the same time, she is the chaos butterfly that pins down other chaos butterflies, a chaos that kills other chaos, much like a certain someone in Amphireus. Furthermore, her quest in Unknowable Domain is named Antinomic Waltz, or Paradox Waltz, while polka literally means half step in Czech to denote the half tempo and the half jump of the dance. It is also suggested that Polka is infected with the anti-organic equation herself, which would explain how she could kill people with entropy, like the Annihilation Scholar. In other words, Polka is only a half-step waltz of the paradox, one half of the two valid conclusions that appeared to contradict each other, but that could be resolved when it was seen that they were from two distinct and exclusive sets. So no paradox exists, only that the inappropriate application of an idea from one set to another causes a seeming paradox, one possible answer to the same question. For Polka, the universe is predetermined because she represents the rose of finality, the equivalence of Reaver in Amphireus. Coming from beyond the circle of knowledge, or in plain terms, existing outside of space and time, possibly coming from the future, Polka is most likely the future Rubert, presumably Rubert 4, traveling back to the past to kill her past selves. All the Rubert from 1 to 3, the replica of the formula of destruction from the past, the equivalence of Feynman in the eternal recurrences of Amphireus. Now, this is where it gets interesting for Herta. In Unknowable Domain, she has been pitched against Polka as the other answer to the question. If Polka represents the predetermined future predicted by Nous, then Herta represents the chaotic future that can still be changed. Back then, this was quite an ambiguous statement because we have no idea what Herta has to do with the destruction or entropy. But with the release of Amphireus, the context has been made clear. As the Pandora about to open the amphora, Herta is in a position to release all the world's evils from the box, and said all the world's evils is the anti-organic equation. In other words, she literally holds the key to unleash chaos into the universe. With the anti-organic equation equally capable of infecting organic or inorganic, it's entirely possible that if Ligas succeeds, presumably in the timeline that Polka came from, either Herta or Scrollum will be infected and become Rubert 3, another copy of Xander's bad thoughts, which would be disastrous for the universe, to say the least. I personally don't think that this will become true in our current timeline, because Feynman is most likely going to eat Iron Tomb to change the meaning of Nanook into the finality instead, but in Polka's timeline, I assume that this was what happened if the Trailblazer had not arrived to assist Feynman in Amphireus. But regardless of who wins, Nous will get their answer in one way or another, either through Polka and Herta or through Feynman. Is the future of the universe predetermined, or is it chaotic? Of course, Nous and the erudition was not the only party that seeks to investigate and control the flow of entropy. From the Fables video, we know that the Lord Ravagers covet this golden blood, using its power to subvert their own paths and bring about the destruction of those they love. But it is not just the Lore Ravagers who covet this golden blood for an unknowable domain. It is also the object of desire of the IPC, the energy source that they sought from the cast iron throne at the end of the universe. Well, sought, not seek, because actually they're already in control of it through Dongfang Qixing possession of the Iron Throne. In the Energy War, while IPC still supported the exploration of imaginary energy, the golden blood of Nanook in the imaginary river on the surface, in reality, it was revealed that they actually purposely delayed the multiple projects and delayed the scepter's extrapolation, so that they can be one of the few to control the energy flow of the universe, exactly like the real-life Petrodollar system. In truth, way back when Louis Fleming had still been the leader of the IPC, Dongfang Qixing and Louis Fleming had already got a hold of the finality's omens through the broken cuckoo clocks, which eventually led them to the location of the cast iron throne at the end of the imaginary river. During the event of Gold and Gears, Dongfang Qixing eliminated Louis Fleming from the equation, becoming the sole person to access the finality's omens and the cast iron throne in the process. So in short, the IPC higher up actually already had access and partial control of the imaginary river, and that was why they purposely sabotaged any research effort to uncover other ways to exploit this imaginary river, the golden ichor of Nanook, for whoever masters the imaginary wields the power of the cosmos. Albeit, the IPC was actually still not satisfied with their partial control. In the current time frame, with the release of the Howling Casket last year, it was confirmed that the IPC is actually still researching the anti-organic equation, the equation to rewrite the destruction. This was actually preceded by Ratio's Keep Up video, which was how I managed to predict this 1 month before the Howling Casket was released. In the Keep Up video, a lot of Ratio's achievements were displayed very quickly at the bottom of the screen. You'll have to pause them to see the full list of it, but the two relevant feats are ones in the fields of engineering and physics. In the field of engineering, he led the research on energy blackbody radiation generator, resolving the energy crisis of the century. In the field of physics, he established the ratio unified field theory, thoroughly elucidating the spatio-temporal discrete structure that was once obscure to humanity. These are actually two very groundbreaking lore drops back then, but if you're not familiar with quantum physics, you're likely to miss it. Let's go over the physics accomplishment first. Ratio unified field theory is actually a reference to the grand unified theory. At an advanced level, physics and math people think that the universe is made of math. Effectively, everything that has existed, currently exists, and will exist can be expressed in math forms. Each force is expressed with their own formula, but they haven't always been different. The universe starts at the Big Bang, meaning that as t approaches zero, everything in the universe approaches a single point, the singularity that started the universe. As time moves forward across the time axis, the singularity expands and becomes the universe. Hence, this is the Big Bang. A consequence of this is that as we move back in time and the universe returns to the near singularity state at the beginning, all the forces that govern the world can theoretically return to become a singular force, a singular formula that governs everything. This is called the theory of everything, which is the goal that theoretical physicists and mathematicians have been gunning for the last 100 years, basically ever since Einstein. In Honkai Star Rail, this is the true nature of the equilibrium, and the formula of destruction and its replica, the antiorganic equation, is only one half of the equation. It is also posited that originally, as a singularity, the universe is governed by a single force, but as the symmetry is broken and the origin expands, this force was later split into four fundamental forces: gravity, the weak nuclear force, the electromagnetic force, and the strong nuclear force. In real life, quantum field theory, or the grand unified theory, could address 3 out of the 4 fundamental forces: electromagnetism, weak nuclear force, and strong nuclear force. This is what Ratio's grand unified theory is, as a reference to the real-life grand unified theory. However, gravity remains stubborn and stays separate from the other 3. In real life, people believe that if we could reunite the grand unified theory with gravity, then we would arrive at the theory of quantum gravity, the theory of everything. This belief and the 4 fundamental forces are directly referenced in Unknowable Domain as the Kingdom of Heaven, a theory proposed by Professor Grotto of Longchime. Naturally, because the IPC has been secretly sabotaging research on new energy all along, they did their best to ridicule this guy and purposely sabotaged his research. However, Ratio did not let himself be sabotaged by the IPC, like Professor Grotto. In the field of engineering, he led the research on energy blackbody radiation generator, resolving the energy crisis of the century. In layman's terms, black body is defined as a body that absorbs all electromagnetic radiation. Most objects aren't perfect black body, but the closest one to that in real life is a black hole. However, even black holes aren't perfect black body due to Hawking radiation. Normally, information fallen into the event horizon of the black hole cannot get out due to the massive mass of the black hole bending the space-time fabric into a curvature. But for virtual photon pairs, which consist of 2 particles with opposite spins, near the black hole, one of the pair can fall into the event horizon, while the other half fell out, which causes the photon to become real. Well, this is actually a simplification of the real math, so the source for that is in the description. Anyway, the photon falling out and becoming real is called Hawking radiation, which slowly causes the black hole to lose mass and energy over time. Eventually, Hawking radiation causes the black hole to evaporate and cease to exist. And so the engineering achievement basically means Ratio could induce Hawking radiation, somehow with science probably, to generate energy. Hence, he can evaporate a black hole with the power of science. This was probably why a Venturan invited him, the literal black hole expert. In short, Ratio also has a presumably very good grasp of Einstein's relativity, and he is presumably very, very close to arriving at the theory of everything, or in this case, the equilibrium of everything. After all, ratio also appeared in Gold and Gear's occurrence on the topic of the antiorganic equation and the equilibrium. And his name itself is logos for reason, as much as it is a pun on the mathematical ratio. So you see, everything in Honkai Star Rail is constructed around the equilibrium between the order and the destruction, between the origin and the finality, between life and reincarnation, between organics and inorganics, between the eons themselves. In the upcoming War of the Eons, the chess pieces have been set on the Braatop Theater. In Amphireus, Talanton is the law, but it is also the cyclicality chess piece, emulating the change between life and death. To gain the authority of law, Saridra must offer up blood of the accursed as the sacrifice. To rewrite the one law, to break the Ouroboros' fate of death tying herself and Hyzelins together, to rewrite a future where Hyzelins can see the ocean beyond the stars, Saridra must offer up her own life. What is the price you're willing to pay for the victory? A shield, a spear, or your chariot? But no matter your choice, the fate of the universe is always in equilibrium.